In this video, we will talk about the context of the letter to the Romans. The letter to the Romans was more than likely written by Paul, the apostle, that we see in the book of Acts. It is one of the letters that we see in the New Testament that is relatively undisputed about the authorship. Paul probably wrote this letter while he was in Corinth. The church that he is writing to was one that Paul did not found, and he probably wrote the letter between 55 and 58 CE. Paul, of course, wrote this letter to the Romans. This Roman church that we find is a mixture of Gentile and Jewish Christians. The letter seems to be focused primarily on addressing Gentile Christians rather than Jewish Christians. And one of the concerns seems to be that Jewish Christians had been expelled from Rome by the emperor, but were recently allowed to return at this point. The church that we see in the book of Romans is a church that Paul did not found and also had not visited, but seems to plan to use as a base for his future travels. According to what we see, Paul wants to visit Spain on another missionary journey and wants to use the Roman church here as a base for his mission. He also wants to diffuse the tensions between church members, particularly the Gentile Christians and the Jewish Christians. As Paul addresses these tensions in the church between the Gentile and Jewish groups, he picks up on a couple themes. The first of these is justice, particularly the justice of God. The idea here is that God did reveal himself to Jews and provided them with the Torah. God was just in the fact that he promised to uphold anything, covenants, promises, etc., that he had already discussed with the Jews earlier in the Tanakh and the Torah. However, this did not exclude the Gentiles from new promises. Paul tries to pick up on this theme throughout his text as a way to diffuse the tensions between the two groups and recognize that they are different but still common. We often hear Romans Road when we talk about the text of the letter to the Romans. Now, this Romans Road idea is the idea that the text of Romans is a way to proselytize or convert people. The intention here that Paul had when writing this text was not to convert or proselytize to people. Instead, he was actually writing to a group of Christians, both Gentile and Jewish Christians. The idea here is that this was kind of a statement of Paul's faith and what he believed about Christianity. He was writing to a group that was, again, a mixed group of Gentile and Jewish Christians whom he had never met, so he was setting forth what his own beliefs were. The Romans Road passage that we see throughout the book of Romans is not something that Paul intended, since he was not trying to convert anybody with this text. The other important theme that we see in the book of Romans is the theme of righteousness. The theme of righteousness comes up again as a way to diffuse the tension between the two groups we see here. This theme is that Gentiles are righteous in their own way, just as Jews can be righteous with or without upholding the Jewish law. If they feel like they need to, then there is no harm in doing so, which is something that Gentiles seem to be pushing back against, that Jewish Christians wanted to uphold their own Jewish law, as long as they continued following Jesus' law and believing in the resurrection of Christ. Now that we've reached the end of this video, you should be able to explain the authorship, composition date, audience, and authorial intent of the letter to the Romans, describe the historical setting and context of the letter, and identify the themes in the letter and give examples of how they are used in the text.